He thought she was just quiet, just a maid who cleaned in silence and left without a trace. But the night he followed her down icy streets and behind a rundown motel, what he discovered would change not only her life, but his forever. This isn't a story about rescue. It's a story about choosing to stay, about second chances, and about how love sometimes shows up in the most unexpected places, carrying a baby wrapped in an old towel. If stories of quiet strength, redemption, and the kind of love that heals old wounds speak to your soul, you're in the right place. Subscribe now and join us for a journey that will stay in your heart after the final word. Let's begin. Ethan Walker stood in the doorway of his aging two-story home, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee he had reheated twice, but never managed to finish. The late autumn air carried a chill that cut through his flannel shirt and tugged at his memories, especially the ones he tried hardest to forget. The yard was quiet, too quiet, save for the occasional rustle of dry leaves dancing across the pavement. His 10-year-old son, Noah, was inside playing with his Lego sets, humming a tune that sounded vaguely like something his late wife used to sing while folding laundry. It was always the little things that struck hardest. Ethan took another sip and turned toward the driveway, just as a modest gray sedan pulled in its engine, sighing like it too had seen better days. From the driver's side stepped a slender woman in her early 30s, dressed simply in a navy cardigan and jeans that had seen more winters than he had. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few strands escaping to frame her pale face. She didn't look up. That was Grace Miller, quiet, punctual, and until now, a complete mystery. He had found her through a community bulletin board at the firehouse. No resume, no references, just a handwritten note that said, "Housekeeping part-time, discreet, reliable, no questions asked." Something about those last 3 words had tugged at him. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who pried, especially since he had his own rooms he kept closed. Grace reached the porch and offered a small, polite smile without meeting his eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." He nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "You can call me Ethan." "Mr. Walker makes me feel like I should be wearing a tie." She gave a soft, breathy chuckle, the sound so faint it almost seemed accidental. Then she moved past him and headed toward the kitchen, her steps light, almost too quiet, as if she were trained to disappear. In the hour that followed, Ethan busied himself with fixing a faulty cabinet hinge while stealing the occasional glance into the kitchen. Grace worked methodically, wiping down counters, organizing the pantry, without being asked, even refolding the dish towels. She didn't chat, didn't hum, just silence and motion like a ghost that cleaned. Noah tiptoed into the kitchen halfway through, clutching a sketch pad. "Hi," he said, peeking at her cautiously. "I'm Noah. I like drawing dinosaurs." Grace looked at him then, and something in her expression softened. "Nice to meet you, Noah," she replied, kneeling to meet his eye level. "Dinosaurs are cool. Do you have a favorite ankylosaurus?" he said without hesitation. "Because it has armor and a tail like a wrecking ball." Grace nodded with a small smile. "Good choice. Tough on the outside." Ethan watched the exchange from the hallway, quietly surprised. It was the first real smile he'd seen on her face, and the first time Noah had approached anyone new without hiding behind his father's leg. Something about her presence, however quiet, was oddly calming. Gentle. By late afternoon, the house gleamed in a way it hadn't since before his wife Caroline passed. The air smelled faintly of lemon and lavender. Grace emerged from the laundry room with the final folded towel in hand, ready to leave. "Thank you," Ethan said, meeting her at the door. "You didn't have to do all of that, especially the windows." She shrugged lightly. "I like the light." He nodded, unsure what to say next. She was already halfway down the porch steps when Noah called out from the kitchen. "Will you come back next week?" Grace hesitated for a moment, then turned her head just enough to let her voice carry back. "Yes, if that's okay." Ethan smiled despite himself. "Yeah, it's more than okay." That night after Grace had gone, Ethan noticed something. Her payment folded cash he had left for her in an envelope was untouched on the side table. He frowned, then opened the envelope. Inside was a note written in neat cursive. "Thank you for the work. Please keep this for the time being. I just need a little consistency first." Gee, it was an odd message. Kind, polite, but also careful, cautious. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, reading it again under the soft glow of the table lamp. A woman who worked hard asked for nothing and left money behind in his world that didn't happen without a reason. The following week she returned again on time. Again, silent again, leaving without $1. And again. And again. Until one day, as she slipped out the back door right at sunset, Ethan glanced out the window and noticed something peculiar. She wasn't heading toward the bus stop or getting into her car. She was walking in the opposite direction toward the old motor lodge 2 blocks down, the same one that had gone through 3 owners in 2 years and was now barely keeping the lights on. He watched her disappear behind its cracked stone wall, carrying a worn canvas tote bag and a heavy look in her eyes. And for the first time since Caroline died, Ethan felt something new inside him, not suspicion, not fear. It was something gentler, protective, and a little bit broken, because sometimes silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's pain folded so tightly even the strongest don't dare open it. Ethan didn't tell himself he was following her. That would have sounded too deliberate, too much like something a man with bad intentions might do. He told himself it was curiosity, maybe concern, maybe even simple coincidence, that 3 Thursdays in a row he happened to finish work early, just in time to see Grace Miller walking briskly down Sycamore Street, her tote bag slung over one shoulder, a scarf wrapped tight around her neck, as if she were trying to disappear inside it. But today felt different. The wind was biting cold, and the sky was the color of worn steel, low and heavy with the promise of snow. Ethan drove slowly in his old Chevy truck, watching as Grace passed the faded grocery store across the street, without looking up, and continued on foot past the public library. Not once did she turn her head. Then, like the last 2 times, she took a sharp right at the crumbling brick building that used to be the old train depot, and walked down the alley toward the Riverview Motor Lodge. Ethan pulled into a nearby lot, cut the engine, and sat for a moment. He hated how it made him feel sitting there like some suspicious neighbor or jealous lover. But it wasn't that. Not really. Something about Grace didn't sit right. Or maybe it did too well. Her quietness, her kindness, the way she never took her pay, the way she listened more than she spoke, yet seemed to carry a weight behind every glance. It had haunted him more than he cared to admit. He climbed out of the truck and tucked his hands into his coat pockets, walking slowly toward the alley. The air smelled of oil trash and something faintly floral, probably from the motel's last attempt at landscaping a decade ago. Ethan stopped at the corner and peered past the edge of the building. There she was. Grace stood at the rear entrance to the motel, fumbling with a key. She looked around, once a brief quick, then slipped inside. The door closed gently behind her with the soft click of a latch. Ethan hesitated, then crossed the alley, taking quiet steps, boots crunching the brittle gravel beneath him. He didn't knock. He simply waited. A few minutes passed before a faint sound met his ears. Muffled cries, high-pitched, repetitive, not frantic, but rhythmic. The unmistakable sound of a baby. Ethan's breath caught. Another minute passed before the door cracked open again. Grace emerged with a bundled infant against her chest, wrapped in a flannel blanket so old the pattern had faded into blurs. She rocked the baby gently, murmuring something low and soothing her breath clouding in the winter air. Ethan didn't mean to speak, but he did. Grace. She turned sharply, her whole body freezing like a deer caught mid-step, her face drained of color. "Mr. Walker." His voice softened. "It's Ethan." She stepped back, instinctively adjusting the baby in her arms. The look in her eyes wasn't fear. It was resignation, the kind that said she had been caught before. Judged before. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said quickly. "I just saw you coming here a few times and you thought I was doing something wrong." Her voice was calm, steady. Not angry. Not defensive. Just tired. Ethan shook his head. "I thought something might be wrong. Not with you. With your situation." Silence hung between them. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Her name is Lily. She's 5 months old." He looked at the baby, tiny, blinking slowly against the cold, with a button nose and a tuft of dark hair peeking from under the blanket. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glassy. "She's sick," Ethan asked gently. "A little fever. She'll be fine. I didn't want anyone to know. I couldn't risk." Her voice cracked and she stopped herself. Ethan stepped closer. "Grace, I'm not here to take her from you. I'm not calling anyone." Grace's eyes welled, and she turned her face slightly away. "I don't have family. No support. I couldn't go to a shelter, they asked too many questions. I've been staying here since Lily was born, cleaning houses during the day, coming back here at night." "In this place?" he asked quietly, glancing at the cracked windows and peeling paint. "It's not safe," she admitted, "but it's all I could afford without paperwork." Ethan's chest tightened, not out of pity but out of recognition. He knew the look of someone holding their world together by thread and prayer. "Why didn't you just say something?" he asked. Grace gave a bitter smile. "People don't help women like me. Not really. They judge. Or worse, they try to fix you and then disappear." Ethan shook his head. "Not everyone." She looked at him then. Really looked. For the first time since they met, her guard lowered just enough for him to see the edge of the storm she carried. "I don't want your charity," she said softly. "I'm not offering charity," he replied. "I'm offering a room, with heat, and a crib, and maybe a warm meal for once. Not because you're broken, but because I know what it's like to be alone and scared and trying not to fall apart in front of your kid." Her mouth trembled. "Why would you do that?" he exhaled, slow and steady. "Because someone once did it for me, and it saved my life." Another silence stretched between them, this one softer, more fragile. Grace looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, and then back at Ethan. Her voice was barely audible. "I don't know if I can trust this." "You don't have to," he said. "Not yet. Just let me drive you back tonight. That's all." She hesitated, then gave the slightest nod. It wasn't an answer, not a promise, but it was a beginning. The old motor lodge room was smaller than Ethan imagined. Dim light from a single lamp illuminated chipped wallpaper, a cracked mirror above the dresser, and a single bed, with a mattress so thin it sagged like wet cardboard. In the corner beside a stack of folded towels and a thermos sat a makeshift cradle, a suitcase lined with worn flannel and an old hoodie for cushioning. That's where Grace gently laid Lily down, pulling the blanket around the baby, with a precision that could only come from months of practice in uncertainty. Ethan stood in the doorway, unsure whether to step further inside or offer her privacy. "You live here?" he asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. Grace didn't turn around. Since Lily was born, the words hit harder when spoken aloud. There was no self-pity in her voice, no performance, just truth, unvarnished and fragile. She brushed Lily's cheek and finally turned to face him. Her eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, but steady. "I clean 4 houses a week. Yours is the only one where the kitchen isn't rotting or someone isn't yelling over a TV." He crossed the threshold, careful not to crowd her. "You never said anything. Never asked for help." Grace shook her head. "That's not how I was raised. You fight through it. Quietly." "Fighting through it alone doesn't make you stronger," Ethan said, lowering himself into the only chair in the room. "It just makes you tired." She let out a breath that could have been a laugh or a sigh. "I was tired before Lily." The sentence lingered in the air like dust in fading sunlight. Ethan glanced again at the makeshift crib. "She's beautiful." "How old?" 5 months. Grace sat on the bed, arms resting in her lap. "Born in July. During the heat wave. No AC in here, just a fan I borrowed from the manager. You had her here." His voice was more breath than sound. "I didn't have a choice." She looked down at her hands. "Went into labor early. I was alone. I cut the cord myself." Ethan swallowed hard. He had been trained to run into burning buildings. He had pulled bodies from wreckage. But the thought of a woman giving birth alone in this place, without even a cold rag or clean water, made his chest tighten in ways he hadn't felt in years. "You're braver than most people I know," he finally said. Grace didn't respond, but her lip quivered ever so slightly. "I want to help," Ethan said gently. "But only if you let me." "I don't need saving," she replied quickly, almost defensively. "I'm not trying to save you," he said. "Just trying to offer a hand." "That's different." Grace looked up at him, studying his face. She must have found something there, some flicker of sincerity, or maybe just the familiar hollowness of someone who'd walked through fire and still carried the smoke. "What do you want in return?" she asked. The question wasn't accusatory, just cautious. Real. Nothing he said. "But I have a guest room. It's not fancy, but it's warm and safe, and Noah would love the company." She paused. "You'd let a stranger live in your home." "You're not a stranger," Ethan said. "You've been in my home for weeks. You've helped my son. You've done more for us than you realize." Grace blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. Her voice lowered. "I don't want Lily to grow up like this, in hiding, in fear, wondering if the knock at the door is someone coming to take her away." Ethan stood, slowly pulling a card from his wallet. "This is the number of a friend of mine, Kate Holloway. She's a family lawyer, used to work child protective services before she got fed up with the system. She owes me more than one favor. She can help you. Legally." Grace took the card, holding it like it might dissolve in her fingers. "And if they find out I had her alone, that I'm not on the grid, they'll see a mother doing everything she can to keep her child safe," he said. "And Kate will make sure that's what the court sees too." Silence settled again, this time gentler. Lily stirred in the cradle, making a soft cooing sound, then fell back asleep. Grace watched her for a long moment. "I never wanted this life," she whispered. "But once I had her, it's like the noise in my head quieted. I still don't know who I am, but at least I know what I have to protect." Ethan nodded. "Maybe that's where healing starts." Grace finally stood. She picked up the canvas tote, now half unzipped, revealing a bottle, a half-used container of baby formula, and a single stuffed bunny, threadbare and missing an ear. "I'll come with you," she said softly. "Just for tonight." He gave a gentle smile. "That's all I hoped for." They stepped into the cold night together. The wind had picked up, stinging their faces as they walked to the truck. Ethan reached over and opened the door for her, watching as she buckled Lily in with the care of someone who knew every heartbeat her child made. As they pulled away from the motel, Grace turned back for one last glance. The room was dark now, the door closed behind her. No keys, no locks. Just a space she didn't plan to return to. For the first time in a long time, Grace didn't feel like she was running from something. She was heading towards something. The house felt different when they returned that night. It wasn't warmer, though the thermostat had kicked in hours ago, nor brighter, even as the porch light flickered to life as Ethan opened the door. But something had shifted almost imperceptibly. The kind of shift that happens not in furniture or temperature, but in presence. Grace stepped through the threshold slowly, Lily tucked close to her chest. She paused just inside the door, her eyes scanning the modest living room with a mixture of uncertainty and disbelief. Noah's sneakers sat by the stair, slightly askew. A blanket was folded neatly over the back of the couch. The scent of lemon cleaner still clung faintly in the air. "I never imagined being here at night," she said softly, as if speaking it too loud might undo the moment. "You're welcome to imagine it more often," Ethan replied, locking the door behind them. She didn't answer, but he saw the way her shoulders dropped just slightly, as if the weight she carried had loosened its grip for the first time all day. Noah peeked from the hallway pajama-clad and holding his well-loved dinosaur plush by the neck. His eyes lit up when he saw Grace, then widened when he noticed the baby. "Is that a real baby?" he whispered, awestruck. Ethan chuckled. "Sure is." Grace gave a gentle smile. "This is Lily. She's very sleepy." Noah inched closer, his curiosity overriding any trace of shyness. "She's so small." "She is," Grace said, kneeling to let him see the baby better. "But she's strong, like an ankylosaurus." That made Noah beam. After showing Grace the guest room, Ethan retreated to the kitchen to warm up a bottle she had brought. While the formula swirled in the hot water, he caught his reflection in the window, rough, stubble-tired eyes, and something else behind them, softness. He hadn't seen that in himself for a long time. The last time someone had lived in that guest room was over 3 years ago. Back then, Caroline was still alive, laughing at his habit of alphabetizing the spices and fussing over Noah's mismatched socks. Back then, the house was noisy, alive. And then, like a switch flipped overnight, silence had become the dominant sound. He brought the bottle to Grace, who had laid Lily down in the crib Ethan had reassembled that afternoon. It had been Noah's, once stored in the attic, like an artifact of another life. Now it sat in the guest room next to the window, where the moonlight gently touched Lily's sleeping face. "She didn't even fuss," Grace said, amazed. "She feels safe," Ethan replied. "Kids know." Grace looked at him, then really looked, and nodded once, subtle but sincere. Later, over mugs of chamomile tea, they sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking softly above them. Grace cupped the mug with both hands, absorbing the warmth like someone who hadn't been warm in a while. "You didn't have to do this," she said, glancing toward the hallway. "I know," Ethan said. "Most people wouldn't. Maybe most people are tired or scared or just too busy surviving." He paused, then added, "But I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough." She tilted her head, curious. "You," Ethan leaned back, eyes distant. "After Caroline died, I couldn't get out of bed for days, weeks really. I'd get Noah ready for school, then just exist. I lost jobs. I lost myself." Grace was silent, letting him speak without interruption. "I remember one morning," he continued, voice low, "I burned the eggs. Not a big deal. But I sat on the kitchen floor and cried for an hour. Because she used to make them just right. You think you're strong until grief shows you every crack in your foundation." Grace swallowed hard. "That's how it felt when I left. Like I'd cracked everywhere and couldn't patch it fast enough." He nodded. "You don't have to patch it alone." A beat passed, soft and full. "I've been waiting for someone to take something from me," she admitted. "Even kindness. I expected a price." "There is one," Ethan said, setting down his mug. She looked up, wary. You have to let us care, he said simply. That's the price. Grace blinked rapidly, then lowered her gaze. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. I don't know how to receive that kind of care. You don't have to know, he said. Just stay. Let Lily sleep in peace. Let Noah tell you about his dinosaurs. Let me warm your tea when it goes cold. Grace exhaled shakily, nodding once. Noah appeared again, rubbing his eyes. Is Miss Grace staying for sleepover? Grace smiled. Just for tonight. Noah tilted his head. Can she stay more nights? Ethan looked at her. He didn't answer for her. He didn't need to. Grace knelt and hugged Noah gently. I think maybe I will. Noah grinned and shuffled back to bed. As the house settled into nighttime stillness, Grace returned to the guest room. Ethan lingered by the kitchen window, looking out at the stars, hands in his pockets, the memory of Caroline's voice echoing faintly in the back of his mind. She used to say, "Sometimes we save people without realizing they're saving us right back." He turned off the light, and somewhere in the quiet, something stirred, not grief this time, but something gentler. Like the early movements of spring beneath frozen ground, morning came quietly. The sunlight filtered through the gauzy curtains of the guest room, casting soft gold across the crib, where Lily stirred cheeks, pink and round with sleep. Grace woke slowly, not with alarm, but with something she hadn't felt in weeks, calm. She lay still for a moment, listening. Not for threats. Not for knocks on motel doors or crying from hunger, but for the ordinary music of a home waking up Noah, humming faintly in the other room, water running in the bathroom, the faint creak of Ethan's footsteps downstairs. She exhaled into the pillow and blinked back a tear she hadn't expected. Lily shifted again, stretching her tiny arms upward. Grace smiled and scooped her into her arms. They were still here, still safe. Downstairs, the scent of fresh toast and bacon welcomed her like an open-armed invitation. She stepped into the kitchen to find Ethan at the stove, Noah at the table drawing dinosaurs with laser-like focus. "Morning," Ethan said without turning. "I hope you like your eggs scrambled because I'm still traumatized by poached." Grace chuckled. It surprised her. "That's fine," she replied, rocking Lily gently as she sat at the table. Noah glanced up from his sketch pad. "Lily can be the Ankylosaurus's baby now." Grace tilted her head, smiling. "Oh, does that mean she gets armor too?" "No," Noah said matter-of-factly. "She gets protected." Grace looked away, quickly blinking. She didn't know how a 10-year-old could cut so close to the heart without even trying. Ethan plated breakfast for everyone, setting a third plate across from Grace, like it had always belonged there. He moved without fanfare, without spectacle, just the quiet kindness of someone who believed breakfast should never be eaten alone. As they ate, conversation began to bloom in little fragments. Noah explaining which dinosaurs were herbivores. Grace mentioning how she once wanted to be a park ranger as a child. Ethan joking about his disastrous attempt to build a treehouse last summer. The table, once marked by long silences and awkward space, now pulsed with life. Over the next few days, a rhythm began to form. Grace cleaned, but less like an employee now, and more like someone who belonged. She folded Noah's laundry while humming softly under her breath. She helped organize the pantry labeling jars, and joking that it would last precisely 2 weeks before falling into chaos again. She cooked dinner once, a simple stew, and Ethan had 3 servings, without even realizing it. In the evenings, while Lily napped, Grace read to Noah, her voice steady and soothing. Ethan would listen from the hallway sometimes, leaning against the wall with arms crossed and a faint smile on his lips. He hadn't realized how empty the house had been until her voice started filling it. One evening, she found a freshly laundered baby blanket folded neatly on her bed, along with a new container of formula and a stuffed bunny that hadn't been there before. She knocked softly on Ethan's door. "Did you—" "Leave this," he shrugged. Noah insisted Lily needed reinforcements. Grace stared at him a long moment. "You know you're making it harder for me to leave." "I'm not trying to trap you," Ethan said gently. "I just want this to be a place you come back to. Because you want to." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "I want to. I'm just learning how." Later that night, Grace stood at the window in the guest room, Lily asleep against her shoulder. The moonlight bathed the nursery corner in soft silver. The crib that once felt borrowed now looked like it belonged to them. The air was warm. The silence was kind. She whispered more to herself than anyone else. "This feels like the life I would have asked for, if I'd believed I deserved it." And in that fragile moment, something inside her shifted. The next morning, Ethan sat in his workshop off the garage, mending a broken cabinet door. The rhythm of sanding, smoothing, aligning it, calmed him like firehouse drills once had. He heard a soft knock behind him. Grace stepped in arms, crossed gently over her sweater. "I want to help pay rent," she said. He straightened. "You don't have to," I know, she interrupted softly. "But I want to contribute. I want Lily to grow up knowing we built something together. Not that we waited for kindness to run out." Ethan nodded slowly. "Okay, we'll figure something out. On your terms," she exhaled, relieved. "Thank you." They stood there a moment in the sawdust-laced light, something quiet and strong forming between them. Not romance, not yet, but partnership. The kind that's rare and honest, the kind that starts in crisis and solidifies in breakfast tables, bedtime stories, and shared silence. That weekend they raked the yard together. Noah threw leaves in the air like confetti, and Grace laughed, really laughed for the first time since she could remember. Her laugh startled even her. Ethan turned to look. She froze for a second, uncertain. "You should laugh more often," he said with no trace of irony. She smiled. "I forgot I could." That night, as she tucked Lily in and turned off the lamp, Grace whispered a quiet prayer, not for escape, not even for strength, but for the chance to keep building this. A home not made of brick or furniture, but of trust, of gentle routines, of morning eggs and second chances. And for the first time in her adult life, she believed she might actually deserve it. The phone call came just after 9, while Ethan was stacking firewood out back. He heard Grace's voice through the open kitchen window, calm, quiet, but strained like a tightrope stretched just a bit too far. "Yes, that's my name. I understand. Monday morning. Yes, I'll be there. Thank you." When he came inside, she had already hung up, both hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug that Noah had painted for Caroline years ago. Sky blue, a bit crooked, full of warmth and memory. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked gently. She looked up, offered a nod that didn't quite convince him. It was Kate Holloway, the lawyer you recommended. She scheduled a meeting for Monday. He sat across from her, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "That's good, right?" Grace hesitated. "It's necessary. That doesn't make it easy." Ethan waited. He had learned with Grace that silence was often the better invitation. And it worked. Eventually she spoke. "I've never told anyone the full story," she began, "not even at the shelter, especially not there." He leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to. I know," she said. "But I want to." Her voice was steady but low. Each word peeled back a layer she had kept buried under routine and politeness and careful smiles. "I married Adam Mason when I was 23. He was charming at first, funny, confident. He made me feel seen, important. But it changed after we married, little by little. At first it was just controlling things, how I dressed, who I talked to, how I spent money. Then the yelling started. Then the shoving. Then, worse." Ethan clenched his jaw, not out of anger toward her, but for the man she described. the coward who had built power on fear. I tried to leave once she continued, packed a bag while he was at work. He came home early, said if I ever left again, he'd make sure no one ever helped me. And I believed him. She paused, staring down into her mug like it might answer back. Then I found out I was pregnant. Ethan didn't move. He was afraid the sound of even a breath would break the fragile flow of her story. I knew I couldn't raise a child in that house. I'd never be able to protect her, not from him, and not from what I'd become if I stayed. So one night when he was passed out drunk, I took what little cash I could find and walked out. No car, no plan, just gone. She exhaled shakily. I stayed in shelters, slept on buses, took cleaning jobs for cash. I hid the pregnancy until I couldn't anymore. When Lily came early, I had no hospital, no midwife, just a rusted sink, a towel, and a prayer. Ethan's throat tightened. Grace. She looked up, eyes bright but defiant. I don't tell you this for pity. I tell you because if I'm going to fight for my daughter, if I'm going to stand in a courtroom and ask them to see me as a mother worth trusting, then I can't keep hiding who I am. Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. You don't need to hide anymore. Not from anyone. She closed her eyes just for a moment, letting the warmth of his touch sink in. That weekend, Ethan drove Grace and Lily to a small clothing store in the next town, over where no one would recognize them. Grace stood stiffly in front of a dressing room mirror, wearing a modest navy blouse and a soft gray skirt. She looked like herself, but stronger. Calmer. When they returned home, a thick envelope waited in the mailbox. It was postmarked from the county clerk's office form's case numbers, and a formal notice a preliminary custody hearing had been set for 3 weeks' time. Grace held the papers in her hands like they were made of fire. 3 weeks, she whispered. We'll be ready, Ethan said. That night, as she tucked Lily into her crib, Grace sat in the rocking chair Ethan had refinished the week before. It creaked gently under her, the rhythm grounding her in something solid. Something real. Noah poked his head in the doorway. Can I ask you something? She smiled. Of course. Are you scared? Grace hesitated, then nodded. A little. Grown-ups get scared too. Noah shuffled into the room and handed her a folded piece of paper. On it was a drawing crayon, a little messy, but unmistakable 4 stick figures, one holding a baby, standing in front of a house with a big tree. I made us a team, he said. Grace looked at it for a long moment before whispering, I think we already are. Later that evening, Ethan found her sitting on the back porch, the drawing still in her lap. The stars above were faint through a cloudy sky, but the porch light cast a warm glow across the steps, where she sat barefoot, shoulders wrapped in a shawl. Is this what healing looks like? She asked softly. He sat beside her. Sometimes. Other times it looks like burnt toast and screaming toddlers and courtrooms. But mostly, I think it looks like choosing to stay. She turned toward him. You've done more for me than I can ever repay. He smiled gently. You're not here to repay anything. You're here because this is your home now, if you want it to be. Grace looked at him, something trembling behind her eyes. But it wasn't fear. It was hope. Snow came softly that year, like it knew not to rush. By the second week of December, the yard had transformed into a quiet blanket of white, the trees wrapped in frost, like a painter's patient strokes. Everything felt gentler somehow. Even the cold had a kindness to it. Inside the Walker home, things were beginning to shift in quiet, unmistakable ways. The once muted house now echoed with small joys, Lily's coos, Noah's laughter, Grace's voice as she read bedtime stories that had once gathered dust. The rooms felt fuller, warmer. Not with furniture or things, but with presence. It had been 4 weeks since Grace and Lily moved in. Ethan stood in the garage rummaging through an old plastic storage bin marked XMIS. His hands brushed past strings of tangled lights, a garland that had seen better days, and finally landed on something solid. He lifted the object with both hands, a small wooden sign in the shape of a sleigh, painted with fading letters. "Joy lives here." He remembered hanging it up their first Christmas as a family, when Caroline had laughed at how crooked it sat above the mantel. For the past 3 years, it hadn't seen daylight. But now, for the first time in a long while, it felt right. Back inside, Noah was attempting to wrap a gift for Lily, with enough tape to secure an engine block. Grace sat beside him on the rug, gently peeling back a strip before it folded in on itself. "You might need less tape," she offered gently. Noah frowned. "But I want it to stay forever." Grace smiled. Sometimes the best things don't need to be held so tight. Ethan entered carrying the sleigh sign and raised an eyebrow. "Any chance you're both ready for the tree?" Noah jumped to his feet. "Can we do the big one this year?" Ethan looked at Grace. "That okay with you?" She nodded, surprised by how easily the word came. "I'd like that." They spent the next hour assembling the 7-foot artificial tree in the corner of the living room. It was older, some of its branches sagging a little, but with the lights woven in, and Noah's handmade ornaments covering most of its lower half, it glowed like something out of a Christmas movie. Ethan lifted Lily briefly, so she could place a soft felt star on the top. She squealed in delight. Noah declared it officially the best tree in town. Then came the chairs. It was Grace who noticed it first. As Ethan began setting the table for dinner, he brought out 3 chairs from the kitchen. He paused, glanced around, and then disappeared into the hallway. When he returned, he was carrying an old wooden chair with a slightly wobbly leg, one that hadn't been used since Caroline died. He placed it at the table, gave it a soft press to check its balance, then turned to Grace. "You're not temporary," he said simply. Grace froze, not because she didn't want to believe it, but because it was the first time someone had said those words out loud. "4 chairs," Ethan said again, "because you belong here." She swallowed hard, her voice catching. "No one's ever set a place for me." "You've always had a place," he said. "Someone just needed to show it to you." Later that evening, after Lily was asleep and Noah had crawled into his blanket fort to guard the tree, Ethan and Grace sat on the couch with mugs of cocoa in hand. Outside, snow drifted lazily past the windows, and the fire popped softly in the hearth. "Do you think it's possible," Grace asked, "to miss something you've never had?" Ethan looked over at her. "All the time." She nodded, staring into the flames. "I think that's what this has felt like. For weeks now. Like I'm standing inside something I've only ever dreamed about. It scares me." "Because you think it'll disappear?" he asked. "Because I think maybe I don't deserve it." Ethan set down his mug. "Grace, the world has a lot of ways of telling people they're unworthy, but none of those voices deserve to be louder than the one that says, 'You are home.'" She turned toward him, her eyes shining. "You make it sound easy." He smiled. "It's not. But I figure we've both already done the hardest part." We stayed. They sat in silence for a moment, side by side, not touching, not needing to. The closeness was enough. It was patient. Earned. Real. Grace leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, and he didn't move. He simply breathed deeply, slowly, fully for what felt like the first time in years. The next morning, Christmas Eve, Noah ran into the kitchen carrying a sheet of construction paper. "I made a new sign," he announced proudly. "It goes over the mantel." Grace unfolded it. Crayon letters spelled out in wobbly block print. "Our family." "Daddy, me, Grace, Lily, and pancakes." "Pancakes?" Grace asked, grinning. "It's what we're having for breakfast," Noah said matter-of-factly. "It's tradition now." Grace looked at Ethan, who simply shrugged. Can't argue with tradition. They taped the sign above the fireplace. Beneath it, Ethan placed the sleigh ornament, "Joy lives here." And as snow continued to fall outside and laughter filled the air inside, Grace realized something simple but profound. She was no longer a visitor. Not in this house. Not in this life. She was home. It began with a knock. Not a heavy, urgent knock. Not the kind that belonged to police or delivery drivers or children selling fundraiser candy. It was slower, colder, 3 hard raps, spaced with deliberate intention. Ethan froze, mid-step, coffee mug still in his hand. Grace was in the living room gently bouncing Lily, while Noah played with his new model train near the fireplace. The Christmas tree twinkled nearby, a faint carol humming from the old radio on the counter. Another knock. Grace looked toward the door and immediately went still. The color drained from her face so quickly, Ethan thought she might faint. "Grace," he asked carefully. She shook her head slowly. "I know that knock." Without another word, she handed Lily to him. Her hands trembled. Noah sensed the tension and stood up wide-eyed. "Mommy Grace." "What's wrong?" Grace crouched down to his level, forcing her voice steady. "Sweetheart, I need you to take Lily upstairs for me. Okay, can you do that? Like a brave ankylosaurus." Noah nodded concern in his little eyes and gently took the baby in his arms. Ethan helped him to the stairs before turning back toward the door. "I'll handle it," he told her. But Grace was already standing there, arms crossed tightly, as if she could shield herself with posture alone. When Ethan opened the door, the winter air sliced in sharp and unforgiving. And standing there, wrapped in a black coat and arrogance, was Adam Mason. He looked older than the picture Grace had once shown Ethan, thinner hairline, receding eyes, sunken, but still burning with that familiar need for control. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Well, well," Adam said, stepping forward. "Been a long time, Gracie." Ethan didn't move. "That's far enough." Adam raised his brows. "And you are someone who doesn't tolerate men like you." Adam chuckled, clearly amused. "I'm not here to start trouble. I'm here for what's mine." Grace's voice, when it came, was cold and clear. "You lost that right the moment you laid a hand on me." "I'm her father," Adam said, eyes narrowing. "You don't get to erase me from her life." "You were never in her life," she snapped. "You didn't know she existed until you went through my things after I left." Ethan stepped fully into the doorway, now blocking Adam's path. "You're trespassing. I suggest you leave before I call the police." Adam's jaw tightened. "And tell them what, that a man came to see his daughter." "You want to test the courts?" Grace asked. "We'll see how they like your history. The police reports, the witness statements, the restraining order you ignored 3 times. Adam shifted his weight, confidence slipping. "You don't have money for a lawyer." "She does, now," Ethan said. That landed like a punch. Adam's eyes flashed. "You think this Boy Scout is going to protect you," he said. "People like him don't stick around. They play hero, then walk away when it gets messy." Ethan's voice dropped calm and firm. "I don't walk away." Adam looked between them, then sneered. "This isn't over." He turned, boots crunching across the frozen porch, and disappeared into the gray street. Ethan watched until the car pulled away, then shut the door quietly behind him. Grace stood in the middle of the hallway, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "He found me." Ethan stepped close, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "He's gone." She shook her head. "Not for good. He never lets go." Ethan spoke with quiet force. "Then neither do I." That night, after the children were asleep, Grace sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the fire with distant eyes. Ethan handed her a cup of tea, but she barely sipped it. "I knew this would happen eventually," she said. I just didn't think it would feel like losing everything I've just begun to build." "You're not losing anything," Ethan said. "You've built something real, strong. It's not going anywhere." "He'll twist things," she said bitterly. "He always does. He knows how to look normal, reasonable. He'll say I ran, that I kept Lily from him. He'll try to take her." "He won't," Ethan said. "Not while I'm breathing." She looked at him, eyes wet with something deeper than fear, grief for the life she thought she had finally claimed. "What if I can't protect her?" "You can," he said. "You already are." The next day they met with Kate Holloway at her downtown office, a compact woman in her late 40s, with silver-streaked hair and no patience for injustice. She read through Grace's documents with sharp, practiced eyes. "He showed up at the house?" Kate asked, looking up. Ethan nodded. He knew where to find her. No idea how. Kate tapped a pen against her clipboard. "Doesn't matter. The hearing is in 2 weeks. We push for emergency custody protection immediately. I'll file it today." Grace shifted in her seat. "Do I have a real chance?" Kate looked at her, her gaze softening. "You're a working mother who fled documented abuse, cared for your child alone, and found safe, stable housing. You've done everything right. Yes, you have a real chance." Grace nodded slowly, holding Lily close. For the first time since the knock, her eyes looked less haunted. That evening, as the house settled into its gentle nighttime rhythm again, Ethan stood on the porch, watching snow fall beneath the glow of the street lamp. Grace stepped out beside him, her shawl wrapped tight. "I'm scared," she whispered. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. But he offered her his presence, his steadiness, his truth. "Then we'll be scared together," he said. And she leaned into him, letting herself feel the strength of a man who stayed. The courthouse smelled like paper and old carpet. Grace sat on a wooden bench in the hallway outside Family Courtroom 3B, clutching a small blanket Lily had outgrown, but never let go of. The same pale blue fabric Grace had wrapped her in that first night in the motel. The fabric was soft now, threadbare from washing, but still whole. Like them. Kate Holloway sat beside her, reviewing a manila folder packed with documents. Across from them, Ethan paced slowly, his coat folded over one arm. He hadn't said much that morning, but his presence was a wall between Grace and the rising tide of anxiety threatening to pull her under. "You okay?" he asked softly. Grace looked up. "I don't know what okay even feels like anymore." Ethan sat beside her, resting his hand gently over hers. "Whatever happens, we face it together." She nodded, grateful. But still, her hands shook. Inside the courtroom, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, cold and impersonal. A judge sat elevated behind a wide bench, his expression unreadable. The room wasn't large, but it felt cavernous in its silence. Adam Mason sat with his attorney on the opposite side, wearing a gray suit that didn't quite mask the tension behind his smile. He met Grace's eyes once and smirked, as if to say, "You won't win." But she didn't look away. Not this time. Kate stood first. Her voice was clear, confident. She outlined Grace's journey, leaving abuse, surviving alone, caring for her daughter, without complaint, building stability in a safe home. She presented medical records, witness statements, the restraining order history. Then she called her first witness. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Ethan Walker to the stand." Grace felt her breath catch. Ethan adjusted his collar, stepped forward, and raised his right hand to take the oath. Then he sat calm, but firm, his voice steady as he spoke. He told them about the day Grace arrived at his home, about the care she gave Noah, about the sleepless nights with Lily, the quiet strength she carried. He spoke not like a man defending a woman he pitied, but as someone describing a partner he admired. She didn't ask for handouts, he said. She gave more than she ever received. My son calls her Mommy Grace. Now, not because we told him to. Because he feels safe with her. Because she's earned that place in his heart. He looked directly at the judge. I've seen abuse. I was a firefighter. I know the signs. I also know healing when I see it. She's done more than survive, she's rebuilt. She didn't do it by hiding from the world. She did it by standing up in it every single day. Grace wiped her eyes, her fingers clutching Lily's blanket tighter. Next, Kate called Noah. Gasps rippled gently through the room. People didn't often bring children into custody hearings. But this was different. Noah stepped up bravely, feet just barely touching the floor as he sat. The judge offered him a warm smile. Kate knelt beside him. Noah, can you tell the court who lives in your house? Noah thought for a moment, then answered. My daddy, me, Grace, Lily, and sometimes our neighbor's cat. But only when it's raining. The courtroom chuckled softly. Kate smiled. And who is Grace? She's our helper. But she's also my friend. She tucks me in and reads me stories, and she makes the best grilled cheese. Do you feel safe when she's around? Noah nodded. She makes the house feel like Mommy used to. The courtroom went silent. Grace pressed her hands to her mouth, trembling. Even Adam seemed to shift uncomfortably. Kate turned to the judge. No further questions. Adam's attorney asked a few generic questions about the child's paternity, about Grace's past housing instability, about the lack of a formal job record. But each time, Grace answered with clarity. Calm. Honesty. When the judge asked if she had anything she wanted to say before he made a decision, Grace stood slowly. I don't pretend to be perfect, she said. I've made mistakes. I've been afraid. But everything I've done since the day I found out I was pregnant was to keep my daughter safe. I didn't ask for a handout. I never expected someone to fight for me. But then I met people who did. She looked toward Ethan, then toward Noah. I don't want to erase anyone. I just want the chance to raise my daughter without looking over my shoulder. I want to teach her that love is safety, that home doesn't have to come with bruises. She placed Lily's blanket gently on the table before her. I'm not asking the court to protect me. I'm asking it to protect her. The judge reviewed the papers in silence for a long moment. Then he looked up. In consideration of the evidence presented, the testimony offered, and the best interests of the child, this court grants Grace Miller temporary sole custody of the minor child, Lily Mason, with protection from contact until a formal custody hearing can be completed. The child's father will have no visitation at this time. Grace didn't breathe, not until she heard the gavel drop, and then she exhaled all at once, shoulders collapsing, eyes, wet hands trembling. Ethan stood quickly steadying her as Noah rushed forward and wrapped his arms around her waist. You did it, Noah whispered. No, she said, kneeling to hug him tightly. We did. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall again, soft and slow, just like that first morning they brought the tree home. Grace stepped into the sunlight, Lily in her arms, Noah at her side, and Ethan close behind. For the first time in years, she wasn't running. She was walking forward, into the light, into the motel hadn't changed. Same cracked sign half lit by flickering bulbs. Same gravel lot that crunched under tires like broken glass. Same faded green door at the far end of the building, room 17, where memory clung to the walls like damp. Grace sat in the passenger seat of Ethan's truck, fingers loosely interlaced in her lap. Lily dozed in the car seat behind them, her breathing steady and soft. I don't know why I wanted to come back, Grace said, eyes fixed on the door. I just needed to see it one last time. Ethan didn't rush her. He only nodded. It's strange, she continued, her voice quiet. This place was both my prison and my sanctuary. I was terrified here. But I also brought Lily into the world here. I became a mother here, alone. She turned to him, her eyes searching. But I wasn't meant to stay alone forever. Was I? No, Ethan said gently. You weren't. Grace stepped out of the truck. Snow had started falling again, soft flakes drifting silently from a pale gray sky. She walked slowly toward the room, her boots crunching in familiar rhythm, but this time, her hands weren't trembling. She paused in front of the door, breathing it in. It's smaller than I remember, she murmured. Ethan stood beside her now. Because you've grown. She smiled softly, then pulled a small envelope from her coat pocket. Inside were 2 photographs, one of Lily sleeping in the makeshift suitcase cradle, and another of her smiling just 2 days ago wrapped in her new pink blanket, Noah's crayon drawing of their team framed behind her. Grace knelt down and slid the envelope under the door. I don't know who'll find it, she said. Maybe the next girl who ends up here. Maybe no one. But I wanted someone to know what came next. She straightened, brushing snow from her sleeves. Let's go home. On the drive back, Lily stirred awake, blinking curiously at the world beyond the frosted window. She doesn't remember that place, Grace said, glancing at her daughter in the mirror. No, Ethan agreed. But she'll remember what comes after. When they returned to the house, Noah was waiting at the window, face pressed against the glass like a golden retriever. As they stepped inside, he ran up to hug Grace tightly, Lily squealing with laughter as he tickled her feet. Did you win? He asked, serious as only a child could be. Grace knelt to meet his eyes. We didn't go to win, sweetheart. We went to say goodbye. To the part of me that thought I couldn't make it, she said. Turns out I could. Noah nodded solemnly, then added, Good. I like this Grace better. She laughed, surprised at how freely it came. That night, after Lily had been fed and bathed, and Noah tucked in with 2 bedtime stories and 1 bonus dinosaur fact, Grace found Ethan in the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, sipping coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. You okay? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment, then set the mug down. I keep thinking about how you've changed. She raised a brow, half smiling. For better or worse. For stronger, he said. She stepped closer. And you, he shrugged. I guess. I stopped living in the past. For a long time, this house felt like a memorial. Like every creak in the floorboards belonged to Caroline. Every corner reminded me of what I lost. Grace listened quietly. But now Ethan continued. I hear Noah's laughter echoing in the halls. I see Lily's toys scattered in the living room. I smell your soup on the stove. And it doesn't feel like a memorial anymore. It feels like a home, she said. He nodded. Because you made it one again. There was a silence between them. Not awkward, not hesitant. Just full. Full of all the things that didn't need to be said out loud. Grace looked up at him, her voice soft. I'm still figuring it out, Ethan. Still unlearning fear. Still relearning trust. He reached for her hand, wrapping his fingers gently around hers. Then let's figure it out together. They sat outside on the porch swing for a while that night, wrapped in blankets, sipping cocoa, while snow dusted the yard. The world around them was still, and for once, there was no storm inside either of them. Grace rested her head on his shoulder. I used to think love had to hurt, she whispered. That if it didn't come with bruises or begging, it wasn't real. That I had to earn it by surviving it. Ethan turned to her, his voice low. And now, she exhaled slowly. Now I think love might look like pancakes on Sunday mornings, like holding a crying baby at 2 a.m., like someone setting a 4th chair at the table without making a big deal of it. Ethan smiled. Sounds like a pretty good definition to me. Before bed, Grace lingered in Lily's room watching her daughter sleep. The soft whir of the humidifier, the gentle lull of her breathing, the peace on her tiny face. It all washed over Grace like a benediction. She leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead. "You'll never know the motel baby girl," she whispered. "You'll only know the home we made afterward." She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway, glancing once more at the crib, the moonlight spilling across the floor like Grace itself. What the motel never saw was this: a woman reborn, a child safe, a future claimed, and the truth was simple. She was no longer surviving. She was living. Spring arrived not with trumpets, but with tenderness. It crept in, gently melting the last of the snow, coaxing buds from bare branches, and filling the air with birdsong that sounded somehow like gratitude. Grace stood barefoot in the backyard, the morning dew cool beneath her feet. Lily sat nearby on a picnic blanket, babbling to herself as she pulled at grass blades like they were ancient secrets. From the open kitchen window came the sound of Noah practicing piano, halting, messy, and full of heart. Inside, Ethan brewed coffee. His sleeves rolled up the scent of cinnamon and toast, wrapping around the room like memory. He watched Grace through the window, the way sunlight touched her hair, the way she stood, like someone who finally knew where she belonged. It had been 6 months since the custody hearing. 6 months of Sundays, with pancakes of bedtime routines, with 2 toothbrushes and a third for teething. 6 months of healing so slow and beautiful it almost went unnoticed until now, because now it was simply life. Later that afternoon, the backyard filled with laughter and soft chatter. Ethan had invited a few neighbors, nothing extravagant, just people who'd been part of the journey in small, significant ways. Mrs. Levine from next door brought her famous lemon bars. Mark, the retired school principal, strummed his guitar under the maple tree while the kids chased bubbles through the grass. In the center of it all stood Grace, holding Lily on one hip, smiling as Noah tugged on her arm to show her his latest drawing. She bent down, kissed the top of his head, and whispered something that made him beam. Kate Holloway arrived carrying a small wrapped box and an even larger smile. "I heard there was a celebration," she said, embracing Grace. "And I never say no to cake." Grace laughed the sound light and full. "It's not really a party, just a thank you." Kate raised an eyebrow. "Well, you're overdue for joy." Ethan joined them, handing Kate a glass of lemonade. "Thank you for showing up when it mattered." Kate looked at him, then at Grace, and nodded. "You two built the rest. I just helped hold the door open." As the sun dipped low, casting gold across the lawn, Grace stepped away from the crowd. She walked to the edge of the garden, where a wooden bench sat beneath a newly planted magnolia tree. Next to it, nestled between stones and blooms, sat the suitcase. Her old makeshift cradle now lined with soil and tiny white flowers transformed into a planter. Ethan had done it one morning while she was out with Lily. At first it had made her cry, now it made her smile. She sat down, running her fingers along the worn handle. There was a small wooden plaque beside it, etched simply, "From shadows we found light." She read it once, then again. And then she let the stillness fill her. Ethan found her there a few minutes later. He didn't speak. He just sat beside her, their shoulders touching lightly. "You did that," she said, softly nodding toward the suitcase. "It's beautiful." He shrugged. Felt right to give it a new purpose. She looked at him. Really looked. His eyes had the steadiness she'd grown to trust. His hands were weathered, but kind. And his heart, the one that had opened so carefully, was now completely hers, though neither of them had named it yet. "You saved me, Ethan." He shook his head. "No. I gave you a place to rest. You did the saving." She was quiet a moment, then asked, "And if I wanted to stay?" He turned to her, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Then I'd ask, what took you so long?" She laughed, blinking away tears. "Say it," he said gently. She hesitated, then whispered, "I want to stay." He reached for her hand, kissed her knuckles. "Then stay." That night, after the guests had left, and Lily had fallen asleep with her bunny tucked under one arm, Grace stood in the hallway, watching as Ethan read to Noah by lamplight. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft. "You're really good with him," she said. Ethan looked up. "He makes it easy." Noah sat up suddenly. "Is Grace gonna live here forever now?" Ethan looked at her. "What do you think?" Grace walked over, sat on the edge of the bed, and cupped Noah's face in her hands. "If you'll have me, sweetheart, I'd love to." He grinned and threw his arms around her. In the weeks that followed, the routine became a rhythm. Mornings, with toast crumbs and toddler squeals. Afternoons with yard games and scraped knees. Evenings with shared glances and soft laughter. And at night, when the world quieted, Grace and Ethan would sit on the porch and hold the day like a sacred thing. No labels, no pressure, just love, simple, steady, undeniable. One evening, long after the kids had gone to sleep, Ethan handed Grace a small velvet box. She opened it slowly. Inside was a key. To the house, she asked, brow lifted. To everything he said. To here. To us. She didn't cry this time. She just nodded, slipped the key onto her necklace and whispered, "I'll never lose it." And so the story that began with fear ended with faith. The woman who once gave birth in silence now lived in laughter. The man who had buried his heart now watched it bloom again. Their home wasn't perfect, but it was real. And the light they had found in each other, it stayed. Forever. Where in the world are you watching from today? We'd love to know. Leave us a comment below and share a little piece of your corner of the world. And if this story touched your heart, the way it touched ours, consider subscribing to the channel. We share real heartfelt stories every week. Stories of hope, kindness, and the quiet miracles that still exist in everyday life. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.